Robin Hood, Chapter 8. How Allan a Dale's courting was aided. How Allan a Dale's courting was aided. What is thy name? Then said Robin Hood. Come tell me without any fail. By the faith of my body, then said the young man, my name 'tis Allan a Dale. And when we say Allan a Dale, it means Allan from the Dale. Friar Tuck and Much, the miller's son, became good friends over the steaming stew they cooked together for the merry men that evening. Tuck was mightily pleased when he found a man in the forest who cooked so well, while Much marveled at the friar's knowledge of herbs and woodland things that flavored a stew greatly. So they gabbed together like two old gossips, and between them made such a tasty meal that Robin Hood and his followers seemed as if they would never stop eating. And the friar said grace, too, over the food, and Robin said amen, and from then on they always had mass on Sundays. So Friar Tuck and Much are the cooks of the band, so they are helping the men to eat well. And the friar, he's the religious one, so he says grace, and remember, he keeps them from evil ways. So they're kind of joking that they had their little church service by saying grace, and then Robin says amen, and that was church. Robin walked in the wood that evening with his stomach full, and his heart therefore full of love for other men. He's very happy. He did not stop the first passer-by, as he often did. Instead, he stepped behind a tree when he heard a man's voice singing, and waited. Like Will Scarlet, this fellow was clad in scarlet, though he did not look quite as fine a gentleman. He was a sturdy yeoman of honest face, with a voice far sweeter than Will's. He seemed to be a strolling minstrel. Ooh, and we know a minstrel from music class with Miss Erbrock, but here we can read a minstrel is or was a traveling singer and poet, usually also played the harp. Let's see. He was a sturdy yeoman of honest face, with a voice far sweeter than Will's. He seemed to be a strolling minstrel. He carried a harp in his hand, which he strummed, while his tenor voice rang out. Hey, down, a down, a down, I've a lassie back in town. Come day, come night, come dark or light, she will wed me back in town. Robin let the singer pass. "'Tis not in me to disturb a lover this night," he muttered, as a memory of Marian came back to him. He's like, oh, Maid Marian. May their wedding be a happy one. So this minstrel is so happy, Robin just wants to let him go. He looks so happy, I'm not going to bother him. So Robin went back to his camp, where he told of the minstrel. If any of you set eyes on him after this, he said finally, bring him to me, for I wish to talk with him. He's like, on second thought, I'd like to get to know that guy. He seems very happy. The very next day, his wish was answered. Little John and Much, the miller's son, were out together on a hunting expedition when they spied the young man. At least they thought it must be he, for he was clad in scarlet and carried a harp in his hand. But now he came drooping along, his clothes all in tatter, and at every step he sighed. Little John and Much stepped forward. No sooner did the young man catch sight of them than he bent his bow and held an arrow back to his ear. Stand off, he said. What do you want with me? Put down your weapon, said Much. We will not harm you, but you must come before our master under his oak tree. So the minstrel put down his bow and allowed himself to be led to Robin Hood. How now, said Robin, when he saw the minstrel's sorry look. Are you not the one I heard yesterday singing so cheerfully about a lassie back in the town? And a lassie is a lady, a girl. The same in body, sir, replied the other sadly, but my spirit is sadly changed. Tell me your tale, said Robin. Perhaps I can help you. No man on earth can do that, I fear, said the stranger, but I'll tell you the tale. Yesterday I stood pledged to a maid and thought I would marry her soon. Pledged is promised. In other words, they were engaged to be married. Yesterday I stood pledged to a maid and thought I would marry her soon. But she has been taken from me and is to become an old knight's bride this very day. Oh, she's got to marry an old knight now. As for me, I do not care what happens to me or how soon without her. Be brave, said Robin. How did the old knight get this sudden advantage? In other words, what happened that he got this lead or this little advantage? Oh, this way. The Normans. Ooh, we know about the Normans from history. William the Conqueror was a Norman. He came over and took over all the land, didn't he? So we talked about that in history class, that the Saxons did not like the Normans. Oh, the Normans overrun us, and no one can oppose them. This old crusader, ooh, we fought in the Crusades, coveted the land where my lady dwells. The estate is not large, but it is all her own. Knowing this, her brother says she must marry a nobleman who has a title, and he and the old knight have fixed it up for today. Ooh, so the lady's brother wants her to marry the old knight because he's higher on the feudal pyramid. But surely, began Robin. Hear me out, sir, said the minstrel. Perhaps you think me a sorry dog not to make fight of this, but the old knight cannot be reached. I threw one of his varlets into a thorn hedge, and another into a water barrel, and a third headfirst into a ditch, but I couldn't do any fighting at all. Does the maid love you? Asked Robin. She says she loves me right well, said the minstrel. I have a little ring of hers which I have kept for 7 long years. What is your name? Said Robin then. Allan a Dale, replied the young man. What will you give me, Allan a Dale, said Robin Hood, in ready gold to deliver your true love to you again? I have only 5 shillings, said Allan. But are you not Robin Hood? Robin nodded. Then you, if any one, can aid me. And that means to help, said Allan a Dale eagerly. And if you give me back my love, I swear I will serve you truly forever. Where is this wedding to take place, and when? Said Robin. At Plympton Church, scarcely 5 miles from here, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then to Plympton we will go, cried Robin. Suddenly springing into action, he gave out orders like a general. Will Stutely have 24 men over at Plympton Church at 3 this afternoon. Much, cook up some porridge for this youth. Will Scarlet, you will see to dressing him for his wedding. And Friar Tuck, be ready, good book in hand at the church. Perhaps you had better go ahead of us all. So he orders his men to get going and help. And Friar Tuck is going to bring his Bible. The fat Bishop of Hereford was full of pomp that day at Plympton Church. He was full of kind of showiness and ceremony and celebration. He was to celebrate the marriage of old Sir Stephen, a returned crusader, and a young woman. All the gentry in the vicinity were to attend. The church itself was gaily decorated with flowers for the ceremony. Gaily, happily. While out in the churchyard at one side, brown ale flowed freely for all the servants. It's a kind of a drink. The guests were beginning to assemble when the bishop saw a minstrel clad in green walk up boldly to the door and peer in. It was Robin Hood, who had borrowed Allan's harp. Ooh, he's in disguise. Who are you, fellow? Said the bishop, and what do you want here? May it please your reverence, returned Robin, bowing very humbly. I am but a strolling minstrel, called the best in the whole north country, and I hope my strumming might add pleasure to the wedding today. What tune can you play? Demanded the bishop. I can play a tune so merry that a sad lover will forget he is jilted, said Robin. I can play another tune that will make a bride leave her lord at the altar. I can play another tune that will bring loving souls together even though they were 5 miles away from each other. Tricky Robin. Then welcome, minstrel, said the bishop. Music pleases me right well, and if you can play up to your talk, it will indeed grace our ceremony. Let us have a sample of your playing. Oh, nay, I must not pluck string until the bride and groom have come. As you will, said the bishop. Then up the lane to the church came the old knight slowly, leaning on a cane, followed by 10 archers outfitted in scarlet gold. After them came a sweet lass leaning on her brother's arm. Excuse me. Her hair was like glistering gold, and her eyes were like blue violets that peep out shyly at the sun. Ooh, simile. Her complexion had the tinting of a seashell, and her face was flushed as though she had been crying. But she walked with a proud air, as though she defied the world to crush her spirit. She had 2 maids with her. One held the bride's gown off the ground, and the other carried flowers. Now, by all the wedding bells that were ever rung, said Robin boldly, this is the worst matched pair that eyes ever beheld. Silence, said a man who stood near. The bishop had hurriedly donned his gown and stood ready to meet the couple. But Robin paid no attention to him. He let the knight and his 10 archers pass by, and then he walked up to the bride. "Courage, lady," he whispered. "There is another minstrel near who may play more to your liking." The lady glanced at him with a frightened look, but read such honesty and kindness in his glance that she brightened and gave him a grateful look. "Stand aside, fool!" "Stand aside, fool!" cried her brother angrily. "Nay, I bring good fortune to the bride," said Robin, laughing, and he was allowed to walk by her side up to the altar. "Now strike up your music, fellow," ordered the bishop. "Right gladly," said Robin, "if you will let me choose my instrument, for sometimes I like the harp, and other times I think the horn makes the merriest music in all the world." And he drew his bugle from underneath his green cloak and blew 3 notes that made the church rafters ring. "Seize him!" yelled the bishop. "These are Robin Hood's tricks!" The 10 archers rushed forward from the rear of the church where they had been stationed, but they were blocked by the onlookers, who rose from their pews in alarm and crowded the aisles. Meanwhile, Robin leapt lightly over the altar rail and stationed himself in a nook by the altar. "Stand where you are!" he shouted, drawing his bow. "The first man to pass the rail dies, and you and all you who have come to witness a wedding shall stay in your seats. We shall have one, but the bride shall choose her own groom." In other words, the bride gets to choose who she's going to marry. Then there was another great commotion at the door, and Robin's men came marching in, with Will Stutely at their head. They seized the 10 archers and the bride's scowling brother and bound them as prisoners. Then in came Allan a Dale with Will Scarlet for his best man, and they walked solemnly down the aisle and stood at the altar. "Before a maiden weds, she chooses," said Robin. "Now, maiden, whom will you have as your husband?" She answered not in words, but smiled with a glad light in her eyes, walked over to Allan, and clasped her arms about his neck. "That is her true love," said Robin, "and the true lovers shall be married at this time. Now, my lord bishop, proceed with the ceremony." In other words, continue. "That shall not be," protested the bishop. "The banns must be cried 3 times in the church. Such is the law of our land." And we can see a band these are announcements made in a church before someone gets married. "Come here, Little John," called Robin impatiently as he pulled off the bishop's frock from his back and put it on Little John. He took off the bishop's robe and put it on Little John. "You are the finest bishop that ever I saw in my life," said Robin. "Now cry the banns." So Little John climbed awkwardly into the choir, and he called the banns for the marriage of the maid and Allan a Dale, once, twice, and thrice. It's like, "Oh, these 2 are going to be married. These 2 will be married. These 2 will be married." There, I cried the banns. "Good enough," said Robin. "Now I see a worthy friar in the back of this church who can say a better service than my Lord Bishop of Hereford. My Lord Bishop shall be a witness and seal the papers, but you, good friar, bless this pair with your book and candle." So Friar Tuck, who had been back in one corner of the church all along, came forward. Allan and his maid kneeled before him, while the old knight, held unwilling as a witness, gnashed his teeth in helpless rage. "Oh!" The friar began the ceremony. When he asked, "Who gives this woman?" Robin stepped forward and answered in a clear voice, "I do, I, Robin Hood of Sherwood, and anyone who takes her from Allan a Dale shall pay dearly." And so the 2 were declared man and wife.